16 incredible, unplanned moments from Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. For 3 decades, Johnny Carson welcomed viewers into their homes 5 evenings each week. As the Tonight Show host, he showed a polished image of calm professionalism. He was the steady king of late-night TV who managed every situation with his famous quick wit and appeal. However, sometimes even Carson, TV's most composed performer, got caught completely off guard by unexpected chaos during live broadcasts. Johnny took pride in being ready for everything, shared a former Tonight Show producer who spent over 10 years working with Carson. But there were times when even he couldn't keep that well-known Carson cool, when he'd totally break down on live TV. Tonight, we're looking at the 16 wildest, spontaneous, and remarkable moments from Johnny Carson's 3-decade run. These are the times when TV's most controlled host became completely vulnerable to his guests, his feelings, or just strange situations nobody could have seen coming. The moment ranked at number 8 brought in more letters from viewers than nearly any other in the show's run, surprising some people while making others happy with Carson's honest openness. First, let's examine Arnold Schwarzenegger's linguistic prank that showcased Carson's remarkable ability to roll with the punches and find humor in confusion. 1. Arnold Schwarzenegger speaks only in German. By the mid-1980s, Arnold Schwarzenegger had successfully transitioned from bodybuilding champion to Hollywood action star, appearing on The Tonight Show to promote his latest film. While these promotional appearances typically followed a predictable format, Schwarzenegger decided to inject some unexpected humor into the proceedings. When Carson asked his first question, Schwarzenegger responded with a lengthy answer entirely in German, his native language, but one that neither Carson nor most of the audience could understand. As Schwarzenegger continued speaking earnestly in German, Carson's confusion appeared genuine. Johnny had no idea this was coming, confirmed a producer present that night. He looked at us in the control room like, what is happening right now? But instead of getting flustered, he leaned into the absurdity of the moment. Carson, never one to miss an opportunity for comedy, began responding as if he understood perfectly, nodding thoughtfully and occasionally interjecting with nonsensical German-sounding words of his own. The audience, catching on to the gag, began laughing at the absurd exchange. After several minutes of this linguistic charade, Schwarzenegger finally broke character, laughed, and switched to English, explaining that he had always wanted to see how Carson would handle such a situation. What made it great was Johnny's willingness to play along rather than shut it down, noted a director who worked on the show. Some hosts would have been annoyed at being made to look foolish, but Johnny recognized the comedy potential immediately and became a full partner in the bit. The segment revealed both Schwarzenegger's underappreciated comedic instincts and Carson's remarkable ability to find humor in potentially awkward situations. Rather than asserting control as the host, Carson temporarily surrendered it, allowing himself to become part of Schwarzenegger's prank. Johnny always said the best moments on the show were the ones no one could plan, recalled a longtime friend of Carson's. This was exactly that kind of moment, something that could only happen because a guest decided to go off script and Johnny was confident enough to follow wherever it led.
2. Sammy Davis Jr.'s rapid-fire impression blitz. Sammy Davis Jr. was one of the most multi-talented entertainers in show business history, a singer, dancer, actor, and comedian whose versatility made him a frequent and welcome guest on The Tonight Show throughout Carson's time. During one particularly memorable appearance in the 1970s, a casual conversation about fellow entertainers suddenly transformed into an extraordinary display of Davis's mimicry skills when he launched into a series of rapid-fire impressions that left Carson and the audience in awe. In less than a minute, Davis seamlessly morphed into Frank Sinatra, Jerry Lewis, and Jimmy Stewart, capturing not just their voices, but their distinctive physical mannerisms with uncanny accuracy. Johnny was literally clutching his stomach, laughing, remembered a camera operator working that night. Not the polite laugh he'd give to less impressive bits, but genuine, helpless laughter. He was as entertained as the audience was. What made the moment special was its spontaneity. Unlike prepared segments where guests would come with rehearsed material, this impression sequence emerged organically from the conversation, showcasing Davis's remarkable ability to access his vast repertoire of voices and mannerisms instantaneously. Sammy didn't need preparation. He lived and breathed these characters, explained a producer who worked on several of Davis's appearances. He'd spent decades studying these people up close, performing with them, hanging out with them. What looked like an amazing trick to the audience was second nature to him. Carson's reaction revealed his genuine appreciation for Davis's talents. As a former performer himself, Carson understood exactly how difficult it was to capture another performer's essence so perfectly, and to switch between completely different personalities with no transition time. Johnny once told me that Sammy was the most complete entertainer he'd ever met, revealed a writer who worked closely with Carson. He said, if you could only watch one person perform for the rest of your life, Sammy would be the smart choice, because he could effectively become dozens of different entertainers. The impression blitz has since become one of the most frequently cited examples of Davis's extraordinary versatility. A brief but dazzling demonstration of why he was considered one of the greatest all-around entertainers in show business history.
3. Johnny crashes his own monologue. One of the most predictable elements of The Tonight Show was its format. Carson's nightly monologue was a TV institution, delivered with clockwork regularity for 3 decades. This predictability made it all the more surprising when, during one memorable broadcast in the early 1980s, the monologue was interrupted in spectacular fashion. Carson had just begun his nightly jokes when Don Rickles, scheduled to appear later in the show, began heckling him loudly from backstage. The audience, initially confused, soon realized what was happening as Rickles' distinctive voice became clearly audible. Carson, momentarily thrown off his rhythm, paused mid-joke. Then, instead of trying to continue, he did something completely unexpected. He broke character entirely, turned toward the curtain, and called out, "Don, get out here!" That was not planned at all, confirmed a stage manager present that night. Don was supposed to wait quietly backstage like any other guest. Johnny breaking format like that, stopping his monologue completely, was unprecedented. Rickles emerged, feigning innocence but clearly delighted at having disrupted the show's careful routine. Carson, rather than being annoyed, seemed to enjoy the spontaneous chaos, bringing Rickles to the guest chair a full segment earlier than scheduled. Johnny loved Don because he was genuinely unpredictable, explained a producer who worked with both men. In a show that necessarily ran on routine and structure, Rickles represented the possibility that anything could happen at any moment. Johnny found that energizing rather than threatening. What made the moment particularly special was how it revealed Carson's willingness to abandon his own carefully established format when something more interesting presented itself. Rather than sticking to the script, he recognized that the unexpected interaction would be more entertaining than whatever jokes remained in his monologue. That was Johnny at his best, the producer continued. He understood that sometimes the best TV comes from breaking the rules rather than following them. Not many hosts would have the confidence to throw away prepared material because something better happened spontaneously. The incident became one of many legendary Carson-Rickles interactions, showcasing the genuine friendship between two entertainment giants who brought out the best in each other precisely because neither one was entirely predictable when they shared a stage.
4. Dean Martin appears drunk and kills. Dean Martin had built his public image around the image of the charming, slightly intoxicated performer who could deliver perfectly timed jokes while appearing to be halfway to drunk. This carefully crafted character made him one of the most beloved entertainers of his era and a frequent guest on The Tonight Show. During a memorable appearance in the 1970s, Martin seemed to lean particularly hard into his tipsy image, slurring words, missing his chair when trying to sit down, and delivering punchlines with the exaggerated precision of someone working hard to appear sober. Dean was playing it up more than usual that night, remembered a director who worked on the show. The audience was eating it up. They loved the idea that they were seeing the real Dean Martin, the life of the party who had maybe had a few too many before coming on air. What made the appearance particularly interesting was Carson's response. Rather than trying to rein Martin in or steer the conversation towards safer territory, Carson effectively became Martin's straight man, setting up situations that allowed the seemingly intoxicated performer to deliver increasingly outrageous responses. Johnny knew exactly what Dean was doing, explained a producer who worked with both men. Dean's drunk act was just that, an act, or at least a greatly exaggerated version of reality. But Johnny understood that audiences loved that image, so he gave Dean the space to play it to the hilt. The segment reached its comedic peak when Martin attempted to tell a story about a golf game, lost his train of thought mid-anecdote, looked confused for a moment, then simply shrugged and said, who cares? It wasn't that funny anyway. The audience erupted in laughter at this apparent moment of drunken honesty. The brilliance of Dean was that you were never quite sure how much was an act and how much was real, noted the producer. Johnny appreciated that ambiguity. It created an electricity in the studio because viewers felt like anything might happen. While some critics questioned the wisdom of appearing to celebrate excessive drinking on national TV, the segment remains a classic example of two entertainment legends playing off each other's strengths. Martin's carefully crafted image finding its perfect complement in Carson's willingness to play along.
George Carlin sneaks in censorship jab. George Carlin had built much of his later career around challenging societal norms and pushing the boundaries of what could be said on TV, most famously with his 7 words you can never say on television routine. His appearances on The Tonight Show required a delicate balance, allowing Carlin to be himself while respecting the network's content restrictions. During a 1983 appearance, Carlin delivered a seemingly innocent monologue about everyday observations. Embedded within it, however, was a subtle but unmistakable jab at network censorship, a clever wordplay that seemed to slip past NBC's standards department but was immediately caught by the more alert members of the audience and by Carson himself. Johnny definitely got what George was doing, confirmed a writer who worked on the show at the time. You could see it in his reaction, that knowing smile and the quick glance toward the camera. He was essentially saying to the audience, "Yes, I caught that too, and I'm going to let it slide." What made the moment special was Carson's silent participation. Rather than steering the conversation in another direction or creating distance between himself and Carlin's subversive humor, Carson's reaction suggested a personal appreciation for Carlin's cleverness in navigating the restrictions. Johnny had his own issues with network interference over the years, explained a producer who worked closely with Carson. While he wasn't a boundary pusher like Carlin, he respected comedians who found creative ways to say what they wanted to say, despite the limitations placed on them. The network executives were reportedly less amused. According to staff members, NBC received several complaints about the segment, questioning how such content had made it to air. Johnny defended Carlin in private, the producer continued. He essentially told the network that if they couldn't figure out what Carlin had done until after it aired, then the comedian had earned the right to get away with it. Johnny appreciated cleverness above almost everything else. For viewers, the moment represented a rare instance of TV commenting on its own restrictions, a meta moment where Carson, Carlin, and the more perceptive audience members shared a joke that existed partly because of the very censorship it was critiquing.
6. Snake escapes during Joan Embry's segment. Joan Embry of the San Diego Zoo was a regular Tonight Show guest, bringing a variety of exotic animals for Carson to interact with, sometimes enthusiastically, sometimes reluctantly. While these segments always carried an element of unpredictability, one appearance in the late 1970s provided a moment of genuine, spontaneous comedy that has become part of Carson lore. Embry had brought several animals that day, including a particularly large Burmese python. As she was explaining facts about the snake, it began to move more actively than expected, suddenly slithering off the desk and heading in Carson's direction. Carson's reaction was immediate and unfiltered. He leaped from his chair with remarkable speed, backing away from the approaching reptile with a look of genuine alarm that sent the audience into hysterics. Johnny was not faking that response, laughed a floor director who witnessed the incident. He had a well-known discomfort with some of the more intimidating animals, though he was always game to try. But when that snake made its move, all pretense disappeared. That was pure fight-or-flight response on national TV. Once the snake was safely recaptured by Embry and her assistants, Carson returned to his chair, straightened his tie, and delivered the perfect punchline. "Somebody better check my pants." What made the moment especially endearing was how it momentarily stripped away Carson's suave image, revealing the same instinctive reaction that many viewers would have had in the same situation. Johnny's greatest gift was his relatability, explained a producer who worked on many of Embry's appearances. In that moment, he wasn't the king of late night. He was just a guy who really didn't want a giant snake crawling up his leg. The audience loved those glimpses of the real Johnny beneath the polished host. The python incident became one of the most requested clips from the show's animal segments, a perfect example of how Carson's willingness to place himself in potentially uncomfortable situations often resulted in the show's most memorable moments. 7. Jimmy Stewart's poem leaves Carson speechless. Jimmy Stewart was a frequent and beloved guest on The Tonight Show throughout Carson's time. Their rapport was always warm, with Stewart's gentle, sometimes halting delivery providing a perfect counterpoint to Carson's smooth professionalism. In 1981, Stewart appeared on the show and mentioned that he had written a poem about his dog, Bo, who had recently passed away. Carson invited him to read it, likely expecting a light-hearted tribute to a beloved pet. What followed instead was one of the most genuinely moving moments in the show's history. Stewart began reading Bo, a poem that started simply enough but gradually revealed deeper emotions about love, loyalty, and loss. As Stewart finished reading, the camera caught Carson's reaction, genuine emotion on the face of TV's most controlled personality. Carson, visibly moved, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Johnny was actually tearing up, confirmed a director in the control room that night. This wasn't TV emotion for the audience. This was Johnny Carson, the man, not the host, genuinely touched by Stewart's words and delivery. What made the moment especially powerful was its unexpectedness. In an entertainment format built around promotional chatter and light humor, Stewart had delivered something authentically poignant, and Carson had allowed himself to respond with equally authentic emotion. Johnny didn't try to cover with a joke or move quickly to a commercial, noted a producer who witnessed the exchange. He gave the moment the respect it deserved, which told the audience it was okay to feel something too. That was rare in late-night TV, which typically valued cleverness over genuine emotion. The segment has since become one of the most remembered from Carson's entire 30-year run, not for its humor or celebrity gossip, but for its simple human truth about love and loss, delivered by one American icon and received with visible emotion by another.
8. Bob Hope bombs, and Carson is over it. Bob Hope was one of America's most beloved entertainers, a comedy legend whose career spanned vaudeville, radio, film, and TV. His appearances on The Tonight Show should have been highlight moments, and in earlier years they often were. By the 1980s, however, a troubling pattern had emerged. Hope, then in his late 70s and early 80s, would arrive with outdated material, often reading jokes from cards and seeming disconnected from the audience's reaction. Johnny dreaded those appearances, revealed a writer who worked on the show during this period.
Earlier in his career, Bob had been brilliant, but by this point, he was essentially going through the motions, telling the same jokes about golf and politics that he'd been recycling for years. What made these segments particularly uncomfortable was watching Carson, himself a master of comedy timing, forced to pretend that Hope's material was landing better than it actually was. Johnny was too professional to ever let on publicly, the writer continued, but backstage, after one particularly painful appearance, he muttered, "Hope doesn't listen, he just talks." It was a rare moment of honesty about a fellow comedian he respected, but whose act had become stale over time. The most awkward of these appearances occurred in the mid-1980s, when Hope arrived with a set of jokes about then-current events that felt stale and disconnected. As Hope continued reading from his cards, seemingly oblivious to the tepid audience response, Carson's face told the real story, a mixture of professional courtesy and genuine discomfort. Johnny's smile got tighter and tighter, remembered a camera operator present that night. He was doing that thing where he'd loosen his tie and glance at Ed, his signal that things weren't going well, but he was going to push through. What made these moments particularly sad was the contrast between Hope's earlier brilliance and his later appearances. Carson, who deeply respected comedy's traditions and its pioneering figures, found himself in the uncomfortable position of witnessing a legend who had outlasted his ability to connect with an audience. It was like watching Willie Mays in his final season, observed a producer who worked on several of Hope's later appearances. Johnny understood better than anyone that comedy is temporary. What works in one era doesn't necessarily translate to the next. I think watching Hope struggle reminded him of his own mortality in the business. Despite his private frustrations, Carson always treated Hope with public respect, a testament to his understanding of show business history and his own place within it.
9. Dolly Parton and the infamous comment. When Dolly Parton appeared on The Tonight Show in 1977, she was already famous for both her musical talent and her voluptuous figure. The latter was often the subject of jokes that Parton herself frequently made with good humor. During their interview, Carson and Parton engaged in the kind of playful banter that was a trademark of The Tonight Show. As the conversation continued, however, Carson made a comment that would become one of the most talked-about moments in the show's history. Looking at Parton's low-cut outfit, Carson remarked, "I'd give a year of my life to peek under that blouse." The studio audience erupted in a mixture of gasps and laughter. Parton, ever the professional, laughed it off with characteristic grace, but the moment had already been captured on live TV. You could feel the control room holding its breath, remembered a director working that night. In that era, that kind of comment was still considered acceptable by many. But even so, it was unusually direct for Johnny, who typically maintained a more gentlemanly image on air. The comment generated more viewer mail than almost any other moment in the show's history. Some found it refreshingly honest, appreciating Carson's willingness to say what many might have been thinking. Others criticized it as inappropriate and disrespectful, regardless of Parton's good-natured response. Johnny never publicly addressed the controversy, said a former NBC executive, but privately he acknowledged that he'd crossed a line. The interesting thing was that Dolly herself never expressed any offense. In fact, she later said she took it as a compliment. What made this moment particularly significant was how it revealed the changing standards of TV and public discourse. What might have passed without comment in earlier decades was now becoming subject to greater scrutiny, a cultural shift that would speed up in the years that followed. For Carson, who had built his career on knowing exactly where the line was at any given moment, it represented a rare misstep, a case where his usually perfect judgment about what was appropriate for TV temporarily failed him. That comment wouldn't make it to air today, observed a TV historian, but it captures a moment in time when TV was still figuring out the boundaries between honesty and respect, between what might be said in private and what was appropriate for broadcast.
The incident remains one of the most frequently cited moments from Carson's 30-year run, a testament to its impact on viewers and its place in the cultural conversation about celebrity, gender, and the evolving standards of public discourse.
10. Don Rickles roasts Frank Sinatra. When Frank Sinatra appeared on The Tonight Show in 1976, he arrived with the aura of untouchable celebrity that had made him a legend and had made many comedians cautious about targeting him with their humor. Sinatra's connections and temperament were well known in Hollywood, and few performers were willing to risk his displeasure. Don Rickles was not among those few. With Sinatra seated next to him on Carson's couch, Rickles launched into one of his trademark roasts, treating the chairman of the board with the same irreverent disrespect he might show to any audience member at his nightclub act. "Look at him, he's the big star," Rickles began, gesturing toward Sinatra. "He comes on and everybody thinks he's so wonderful. Let me tell you something, this man is overrated." As Rickles continued his attack, the camera caught Carson's reaction, a mixture of nervous laughter and genuine concern about how Sinatra might respond to this public teasing. "Johnny was actually nervous," confirmed a producer who was there that night. Carson had seen Sinatra's temper firsthand over the years and knew he didn't always respond well to being the target of jokes. There was real tension in the studio. Would Sinatra laugh it off, or would he get angry? The moment reached its peak when Rickles, in typical fashion, grabbed Sinatra's knee and said, "Frank, believe me, I'm only kidding. You know I love you. Can I get a ride home?" To everyone's relief, Sinatra burst into genuine laughter, clearly appreciating Rickles' willingness to treat him like any other target, rather than handling him with kid gloves because of his status. "That took guts," Carson later admitted to his producer. "Don knew exactly how far he could push, but there was still real risk there. Not many people talked to Sinatra that way and lived to tell about it." What made the moment special wasn't just the comedy, but the cultural significance. It represented a rare instance where Sinatra, notorious for controlling his public image, allowed himself to be publicly roasted without consequences. For Carson, who took pride in creating a show where anything could happen, it was a perfect demonstration of the unpredictable magic that live TV could produce when strong personalities collided in unexpected ways.
11. Robin Williams goes rogue. When Robin Williams appeared on The Tonight Show, the normally structured format of late-night TV gave way to pure, uncontrolled chaos. Williams, with his manic energy and lightning-fast improvisation skills, simply couldn't be contained within Carson's usual interview framework. Johnny once said Robin was like trying to catch lightning in a bottle while it's already running away, remembered a Tonight Show writer who witnessed several of Williams' appearances. Most guests followed Johnny's lead. Robin was one of the few who actually forced Johnny to follow his. A particularly memorable appearance happened in the early 1980s when Williams was supposedly there to promote a film. Within seconds of sitting down, however, he had launched into a series of rapid-fire impressions, jumped from the guest chair to demonstrate a physical bit, and transformed Carson's desk into an impromptu stage for what seemed to be a completely unplanned performance. The producers would be in the control room in a panic, revealed a director who worked on several of Williams' appearances. They'd be saying, "Where is he going with this? Should we cut to commercial?" But Johnny would just wave them off. He recognized that with Robin, you just had to let go and enjoy the ride. What made these appearances special was watching Carson, normally the one in control, willingly give up control to Williams' frantic genius. Rather than trying to steer the conversation back to prepared talking points, Carson would simply lean back in his chair, sometimes wiping away tears of laughter, content to be an audience member rather than a host. Johnny loved that Robin kept him on his toes, explained a producer. After thousands of interviews that followed predictable patterns, Robin was gloriously unpredictable. Johnny once told me, "I never know what's going to happen when Robin sits down. And that's the highest compliment I can give a guest." Williams' appearances became so legendary that Carson would actually prepare the audience before he came out, essentially warning them to expect the unexpected. It was one of the rare instances where Carson acknowledged that his usual format might not apply, a testament to his recognition of Williams' singular talent.
12. Steve Martin's Absurdist Magic Routine. When Steve Martin came on The Tonight Show in 1980, he was already making a name for himself as a pioneer of a new type of anti-comedy. Humor that got its power from being deliberately awkward, absurd, and sometimes completely nonsensical. For this particular visit, Martin announced he would do a magic act, making Carson step aside and give him the stage. What followed was one of the strangest and funniest performances ever seen on The Tonight Show. Martin's great Flydini routine featured the comedian pretending to unzip his pants and pull various objects from his fly: eggs, a salt shaker, a ringing phone, and eventually a tiny hand that waved to the audience. The beauty of that moment was watching Johnny's reaction, remembered a writer who worked on the show. He started out playing the straight man, but as the routine got more and more absurd, you could see him really losing it. Not just performing laughter, but actually being caught off guard by Martin's commitment to the bit. By the end of the routine, Carson was bent over, struggling to keep his composure as Martin continued with complete serious face. What made the moment special was the visible delight Carson took in being surprised by Martin's strange creativity. Johnny loved being truly entertained, explained a producer who worked with both men. He saw thousands of comedians over the years, and very few could really surprise him. Steve was one of the rare performers who could make Johnny feel like a regular audience member again, someone who didn't know what was coming next. The routine has since been recognized as a perfect example of Martin's revolutionary approach to comedy, breaking expectations, embracing absurdity, and finding humor in the deliberately uncomfortable. For Carson, it represented a rare chance to step out of his host role and simply enjoy being caught up in another performer's unique vision. After the camera stopped, Johnny was still laughing, the producer remembered. He turned to me and said, "That's the kind of thing that makes this job worth doing." High praise from a man who had seen it all.
13. Animal handler's monkey climbs Carson's head. During his time on The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson welcomed countless animal experts with their unusual companions. These segments were always unpredictable, but perhaps none more so than a 1979 visit by animal handler Joan Embry and her capuchin monkey. The segment started routinely, with Embry explaining the monkey's habits while Carson listened carefully. Then, without warning, the monkey decided Carson's perfectly styled hair looked like an interesting play area. The monkey just jumped right onto Johnny's head, remembered a camera operator working that night. There was no warning, no build-up. 1 second it was sitting quietly, the next it was using Johnny's famous hair as a jungle gym. What made the moment legendary wasn't just the monkey's actions, but Carson's response. Rather than panicking or asking for help, he stayed perfectly still, with a look of resigned amusement on his face as the animal thoroughly messed up his carefully styled hair. Johnny's hair was sacred. It was always perfect, not a single hair out of place, explained a makeup artist who worked on the show. To see it completely destroyed by a monkey while he just sat there with that deadpan look, it was comedy gold. When the monkey finally went back to its handler, Carson looked directly into the camera, his hair sticking up in every direction, and said with perfect timing, "And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I prefer cats." The audience exploded with laughter. What made this moment particularly special was how it showed Carson's greatest talent as a host, his ability to find humor in completely unplanned disasters without ever seeming bothered or losing his cool.
"That was Johnny at his best," said a producer who worked on the show for many years. He knew the audience wasn't laughing at him. They were laughing with him at how absurd the situation was. He always understood the difference, and he never minded being part of the joke as long as it was funny. The monkey incident became one of the most requested clips from the show's archives, a perfect example of Carson's unique ability to keep his dignified image even in the most undignified situations.
14. Bette Midler makes Carson cry. As Johnny Carson's 30-year time on The Tonight Show came close to ending in May 1992, the final episodes became more and more emotional. The second-to-last show with Robin Williams and Bette Midler was expected to be fun, but nobody expected the powerful moment that would become one of Carson's most memorable goodbyes. Near the end of the episode, Midler, who had joked and chatted with Carson throughout her part, suddenly changed the mood by saying she wanted to sing something special for the leaving host. She started a gentle version of One for My Baby and One More for the Road, the Harold Arlen and Johnny Mercer classic about final drinks and farewells. As Midler sang directly to him, the camera caught something remarkable. Johnny Carson, TV's most controlled personality, with tears forming in his eyes. You could have heard a pin drop in the studio, remembered a sound engineer working that night. Everyone, the crew, the audience, we all knew we were seeing something very intimate. Johnny wasn't just letting himself be vulnerable on camera. He was saying goodbye to 30 years of his life. For a man known for keeping his emotions private, this public display was unprecedented. Throughout his career, Carson had carefully kept a certain distance, charming but never fully showing his true feelings. In this moment, however, the wall came completely down. Johnny didn't try to hide it or make a joke to lighten the mood, said a director who worked on the final shows. He let himself have that human moment with Bette and the audience. It was incredibly touching, precisely because we all knew how unusual it was for him to show that side of himself. When Midler finished, Carson leaned forward and kissed her hand, a gesture of real gratitude that said everything. He then looked into the camera and simply said, "I can't top that." The moment has since been called one of the most genuine in TV history, a rare instance where the usually guarded Carson let viewers see his real emotions during what was clearly an overwhelming personal change.
15. Don Rickles breaks Carson's cigarette box. Johnny Carson was famous for being careful about his set. Every object on his desk had its spot, including a wooden cigarette box that was like a personal treasure to him. When Don Rickles hosted The Tonight Show as a guest in October 1973 and accidentally broke that box, he knew he was in big trouble. The following night, when Carson came back, he talked about the broken box on air, showing viewers the damage and promising to get back at Rickles. But nobody, including Rickles, could have guessed what form that payback would take. A few months later, Carson found out that Rickles was filming his sitcom CPO Sharky on a nearby NBC soundstage. In an unusual move, Carson decided to interrupt the live filming, with cameras following, to confront Rickles about the cigarette box. "That was totally unplanned," said a Tonight Show producer who was there. "Johnny just looked at us during a commercial and said, 'Isn't Rickles filming today? Let's go there.' The crew grabbed whatever equipment they could and literally ran across the studio lot. What happened next was one of the most spontaneous and funny moments during Carson's time. He burst onto Rickles' set during actual filming, with the CPO Sharky audience completely puzzled about what was going on. Rickles, caught in the middle of a scene wearing his Navy uniform, looked truly shocked as Carson marched in. "I was in the middle of a scene," Rickles complained. Carson replied, "I don't care about your scene. You broke my cigarette box." What made the moment special wasn't just the surprise visit, but how it showed the real friendship between the two men. Despite Carson's fake anger, his fondness for Rickles was clear, as was Rickles' joy at being surprised by the usually reserved host. "Johnny wouldn't have done that with just anyone," said a director who worked with both men. It showed how much he really loved Rickles and how comfortable they were together. Johnny was always in charge of his show, but with Don, he was willing to be the target of the joke.
The incident became an instant TV classic, replayed many times over the years, and remembered as one of the few times when Carson completely broke from format and let spontaneity take over.
16. Ed Ames's Tomahawk disaster. It started as a simple demonstration. Ed Ames, who was playing Mingo on the hit NBC show Daniel Boone, came on The Tonight Show in April 1965 to show how to throw a tomahawk, a skill his character often showed on the Western drama. The segment began normally. Ames talked about the correct method while Carson paid close attention. A wooden outline shaped like a cowboy was placed as a target, and Ames got ready to throw. What came next made TV history. Ames threw the tomahawk accurately, but it stuck right in the wooden figure's groin area. The studio crowd immediately burst into laughter, but Carson's response turned a funny mistake into one of TV's most famous moments. Johnny completely lost control, remembered a director who was in the control room that evening. We'd watched him laugh before, but never this intensely. He was actually bent over double, with tears running down his face, totally unable to talk for what seemed like several minutes. Carson's laughing lasted almost 3 minutes, forever in TV time. When he finally recovered enough to speak, he said a perfectly timed joke. "I didn't even know you were Jewish." This line made the audience laugh even harder and showed Carson's amazing talent for finding the perfect joke even in totally unplanned situations. What made this incident especially memorable was how it showed Carson's genuine, unfiltered response. His professional image completely disappeared as he gave in to unstoppable laughter. That moment revealed why Johnny was so loved, said a former NBC executive. In a time of carefully controlled celebrity images, viewers saw Johnny completely lose his composure. It was real in a way TV rarely is. The Tomahawk incident became so famous that it was shown many times over the years, including during Carson's last week in 1992, proof of its place as perhaps the most naturally perfect moment in the show's history. These 16 moments represent more than just funny clips or memorable TV incidents. They reveal the essence of what made Johnny Carson's Tonight Show a cultural institution for 3 decades. His ability to maintain composure while simultaneously embracing chaos, his willingness to be vulnerable when the moment called for it, and his recognition that sometimes the best entertainment comes from abandoning the script entirely. These qualities made Carson not just a great host, but a true television legend. Whether he was laughing uncontrollably at a tomahawk landing in an unfortunate spot, tearing up at a heartfelt poem, or backing away from an escaping snake, Carson showed audiences that perfection wasn't about never losing control. It was about knowing when to let go and trust in the magic of the unexpected moment.
These unforgettable moments remind us why Johnny Carson remains the gold standard of late-night television, even decades after his final bow. But here's the question. Which of these 16 moments do you think was the most legendary? Was it the tomahawk throw that had Johnny in tears? Bette Midler's emotional farewell? Or maybe Robin Williams turning the studio into pure chaos? Drop your pick in the comments below and tell us why that moment stands out to you. Better yet, if you remember watching any of these live or have your own favorite Carson moment we didn't cover, we want to hear about it. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane and want more deep dives into television history's greatest moments, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to ring the bell icon so you never miss when we explore more iconic TV moments, legendary performances, and the stories behind entertainment's most unforgettable scenes. Share this video with anyone who appreciates classic television or needs a reminder of what made Johnny Carson the king of late night. Trust us, they'll thank you for it. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the best moments in life, just like on The Tonight Show, are the ones nobody planned.